Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a world of oil lamps, creaking floorboards, and perfectly pressed pinafores, except nothing here is quite as it seems. You find yourself standing outside a tall, narrow Victorian townhouse. Ivy curls around the ironwork gate. Inside, all is candlelight and chatter, corsets and cucumber sandwiches. But behind the heavy drapes and velvet cushions, a secret rustles. There's something off about the way the maid just curtsied. Too practiced, too theatrical. And if you listen closely, that butler greeting guests at the door? He whispered something about needing to get back to his tailoring job by morning. You're in a household where the wealth is borrowed, the accents rehearsed, and the help, well, it may have been hired just for the evening. You probably won't survive this world unless you can tell a genuine scullery maid from a dressmaker's apprentice pretending to polish the silver. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments, what city and time are you listening from? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You push open the front door and step into the marble-tiled foyer. It's the 1880s. The air smells faintly of beeswax and perfume. Your boots clack quietly against the polished floor. Someone offers to take your coat. An older woman in a maid's uniform, eyes downcast, apron crisply ironed. She vanishes silently through a side door. But something tells you she doesn't live here. You're attending a small social gathering hosted by a Mrs. Eleanor Chatwood, recently moved into this part of West London. Her new address, only a block from a real duchess, has been whispered about in drawing rooms and tea rooms alike. She greets you in the front parlor, her curls carefully arranged and her silk gown just a smidge too fashionable, tailored to impress, like the house itself. And like the help. She apologizes for the delay in tea. My new maid is still finding her way around the pantry, and you smile politely, because that's what one does. But you also note the pantry is directly visible from your seat and no one is inside it. Still, the illusion must be maintained. In this society, illusion isn't lying, it's social strategy. The Victorians weren't exactly subtle about class. Appearances were everything, and if you didn't appear to have at least 3 maids, a cook, and a coachman, you could forget invitations to the right salons. There was even a running joke among social climbers: better no husband than no footman. It's easy to forget how fluid the boundaries were under all that starch. Real wealth and old blood couldn't be faked, but the appearance of middle-class gentility? That was absolutely within reach, if you were clever. And Victorian women, boxed in by strict gender roles, got very clever. The rented maid was the perfect tool in this theater of refinement. As you sit back in the velvet chair and accept your teacup, poured not by a maid but by the hostess herself when no one was looking, you start to spot the cracks in the illusion. The young woman who serves the biscuits seems oddly unsure of where to place them. Her nails, if you're being honest, look recently manicured, hardly the hands of someone scrubbing floors all day. She flinches when a guest thanks her. Historians still argue whether this trend began purely as a necessity of appearance or as a sly form of rebellion. Women like Eleanor had little access to capital or formal power. Their currency was image, and if maintaining that image meant borrowing a bit of help for an hour or two, so be it. Some households even took it further. You'll hear of those later. Cases where the maid didn't just serve tea, but performed elaborate domestic pantomimes, brushing hair in full view of guests, bustling theatrically down hallways, making loud comments like, "Miss Eleanor, your gloves are on your dressing table." The illusion required coordination. It wasn't enough to rent a person in uniform. You had to rehearse lines, make sure your guests saw what they were meant to see, and most importantly, not let them catch you pouring your own bathwater. That would be social death. It's a strange feeling watching this play unfold. Part of you admires the precision. Another part aches at the effort, every glance curated, every cough muffled. There's a desperate grace to it all. Outside the window, gas lamps flicker in the fog. Inside, your hostess laughs a little too brightly. The maid reappears with a tray of tarts. though someone else carried them in just minutes ago. No one mentions this. And for a brief moment, you're unsure whether the real performance is the party or the life being portrayed through it. Your hostess touches your arm gently and says, "We mustn't mind the help, she's new." You nod, and so does everyone else, though the unspoken understanding is clear. We're all in on the game. Pretending not to notice is the price of admission. Welcome to the parlor of pretense. Stay long enough, and you might forget what's real too. You're still perched on the velvet chair, the scent of oversteeped Earl Grey swirling beneath your nose. Across the parlor, Mrs. Eleanor Chatwood smiles with the careful ease of someone who spent the last week memorizing the order of spoon placement on a tea tray. You're beginning to see it more clearly now. Every hemline, every word, even the way she sips her tea with pinky extended. It's not natural. It's studied. The climb, you realize, is exhausting. Victorian society doesn't offer many ladders to women like Eleanor. She's not aristocracy, not landed gentry. Her father was something practical, a barrister or merchant, depending on who's asking. Her husband is in shipping, which usually means either dreadfully rich or eternally vague. And Eleanor? She's doing the one thing women of her class could, becoming a social architect. She's navigating the unwritten laws of who one may call upon, when one may write, how many calling cards to leave, and whether one's umbrella is sufficiently respectable. She's aware of every glance, every whispered critique. You don't just attend society in this world, you perform it, and the stakes are higher than they seem. Reputation meant everything. An awkward encounter, a whispered rumor, even a poorly folded napkin could demote you faster than you can say dowry. Historians still argue whether this fixation on appearances came from genuine social pressure or from women quietly seizing the only stage they were allowed. Either way, Eleanor is playing the part masterfully. You wonder how many evenings she spent rehearsing how to welcome guests with effortless charm, how to raise an eyebrow just enough to suggest amusement, but not scorn. And you wonder what it cost her, because behind all this refinement, Eleanor is managing a rotating cast of women she's hired through word of mouth. Maids by appearance, not by employment. Some work at a dress shop by day, others are cooks in other homes, but know how to pass a silver tray without clinking it. They're paid in cash, 1 or 2 shillings an hour, and vanish before sunrise. There's no contract, no record, just the tight-lipped agreement that discretion will be observed. If anyone speaks, well, they won't be invited again. That applies to both guest and fake maid. You glance toward the hallway. One of the maids, short, round-faced, freckles dimmed by powder, hovers by a table, refolding a napkin she already folded 5 minutes ago. She catches your eye, then quickly looks down. She's doing her best, but you can tell she's never folded a napkin in her life before today. And it works. Somehow, despite the small stumbles, the room still buzzes with polite admiration. A younger woman nearby whispers that Eleanor's new cook is divine. The biscuits have lavender in them, which means sophistication. The reality? They were baked that morning by a bakery on Kensington High Street and reheated in a servant's borrowed oven 2 blocks away. No one questions it. Appearances have been satisfied. In the dining room, a few guests are murmuring about Eleanor's curtains, the pattern's supposedly new money, which is both an insult and a compliment. You hear someone casually mention that Lady Halberton's maid now wears gloves while ironing, and your hostess's eye twitches. Barely. You realize she'll probably instruct tomorrow's borrowed maid to wear gloves too. The pressure to rise in society could be unbearable. Victorian etiquette books ran hundreds of pages long. There were different types of curtsies for different ranks. There were rules about how many courses a luncheon could include before it was considered vulgar. And behind every one of those rules stood women like Eleanor, spinning illusions just to stay afloat. You hear a quiet cough behind you. The maid with the tray now returns with a fresh plate of scones. Her shoes squeak slightly. They're not house shoes, but street boots, cleaned as best as possible. You notice a stray hair peeking from beneath her cap. Her hands tremble slightly as she sets down the plate. She looks about your age, maybe younger. You wonder what she's thinking, whether she's amused by this charade or finds Jia. Is it frustrating? Whether she envies Eleanor or pities her. After all, it's not clear who is pretending more, the hostess trying to seem richer, or the maid trying to seem invisible. One thing's for sure, this wasn't just about convenience. For Eleanor and countless others, the fake maid was a survival mechanism. Hiring a servant full-time was expensive, not just wages, but room and board, uniforms, and agency fees. For women straddling the line between modest comfort and aspirational gentility, that simply wasn't feasible. But renting the illusion for an afternoon? That was doable. Some even developed codes. 1 bell ring meant come in quietly. 2 bell rings meant enter and speak a line. Occasionally, Eleanor's maid would be instructed to wander through the parlor dusting the same surface repeatedly, just to give the impression of a well-run household. One guest famously noted that the Chatwoods' drawing room was immaculate. Well, it had been dusted 6 times that day by 3 different women wearing the same borrowed cap. Quaint, isn't it? There's a kind of fragile dignity in it all. Eleanor's social climb may be built on borrowed labor and whispered cues, but the effort? That's real. The longing for stability, admiration, or even just belonging. That's very real too. As the conversation hums around you, and another teacup is offered by someone who will disappear into the fog once the guests leave, you realize something. Everyone in this room is pretending to be someone. Even you. You've shifted to the drawing room now, an elegant space with faded roses etched into the wallpaper and a faint scent of coal smoke lingering behind the perfume. A marble clock ticks softly above the mantel, each second carefully curated, just like everything else in this home. You've lost count of the number of servants you've glimpsed tonight, maids, footmen, a young boy wit with a tray of cardamom biscuits. But how many of them actually work here? You catch yourself watching again. The so-called parlor maid reappears, now fluffing a cushion that didn't need fluffing. She moves smoothly, almost too smoothly, like someone who's rehearsed the motion in a mirror. Her apron is spotless, her hair perfectly pinned. Her expression? Blank, polite, and not entirely present. She knows you're watching, and yet she acts as though you aren't. That's part of the job, being simultaneously visible and invisible. The ideal Victorian servant existed in a paradox. They had to be present, but not intrusive. Obedient, but not mechanical. Decorative, but not too decorative. A maid who looked right was often more important than one who actually knew how to scrub a floor. That's where the hired help came in. In a society obsessed with appearances, even your household staff became part of your outfit. Like choosing the right brooch or matching gloves. But instead of silk, you were dressing your home in people. Historians still debate how widespread this practice truly was. Was it mostly a London phenomenon, or did it extend to smaller towns and far-flung colonies? Some argue that daily servant hiring was a rare oddity. Others believe it was the open secret of a whole class of women navigating life on the edge of respectability. Regardless, the daily maid was real, and her presence could elevate or unravel a social evening. Tonight, for example, the illusion is going well. A well-placed cough here, a polite, "Yes, madam," there. These women know how to hold a tray, how to glide rather than walk, how to keep their eyes a little unfocused, as if their thoughts never truly leave the dustpan. But you're beginning to see it, the tiny signals. One of the maids avoids passing the same guest twice, probably because she already greeted them at the door under a different name. Another adjusts her cap constantly, clearly unused to the sensati, one of it tugging at her scalp. A third vanishes into the kitchen and doesn't come out for 20 minutes, most likely to hide her laughter. You can't help but feel a little charmed. And then you hear it. A door creaks, a hallway shuffle, and from behind a folding screen, a maid emerges, wiping her hands on a towel. A guest glances her way and raises an eyebrow. The towel is embroidered, not standard issue for a servant. It's the kind you'd find at Liberty's, not in a scullery. You catch a flash of panic in the maid's eyes before she quickly ducks her head and disappears again. This is where the illusion sometimes cracks. There's a story, whispered around tea tables and sewing circles, of one Miss Clara Biddlesby who attempted to throw a dinner for the vicar's wife and accidentally hired the same girl her neighbor had used the week before, for a completely different role. The maid had been French at the neighbor's party and Scottish at Clara's, and spoke neither language convincingly. The vicar's wife never visited again. So tonight, your hostess is careful. She rotates the girls between rooms. No one serves too many cups of tea. No one speaks unless spoken to. They follow a choreographed loop, designed not to work, but to be seen working. One of them walks past with a tray of lemon slices. She's a little too graceful. Ballet background, perhaps? You wouldn't be surprised. Some of these women were artists, seamstresses, even struggling actresses. Being a daily maid was like getting cast in a role, and the part paid better than most factory jobs. You admire her composure, especially when a guest asks her something unexpected. Is the tea Ceylon or Darjeeling? The girl pauses, then murmurs, "Madam prefers Ceylon," and walks on with the poise of a duchess. Crisis averted. Not all households were so successful. One evening, a woman named Louisa Trenwith attempted to host a birthday tea and hired 3 maids through her cousin's milliner. Unfortunately, one of them mistook a sugar bowl for a chamber pot, and the other 2 had a loud argument about who got to wear the clean apron. The guests sipped in horrified silence while the youngest maid cried behind the hat stand. Tonight, though, Mrs. Eleanor Chatwood has curated well. Your teacup is refilled with a practiced flick of the wrist. The room hums with carefully moderated laughter, and everywhere you look, the help remains quietly in motion, moving, polishing, pretending. They are ghosts in uniforms. You lean back in your seat and let the illusion wrap around you. You know it's a performance. They know it's a performance. And yet, there's something oddly comforting about the whole charade, like watching a magic trick you've already figured out, but still enjoy. The woman beside you whispers, "Eleanor's girls are so discreet. One barely knew she was there." You nod, suppressing a smile. That's the goal, isn't it? To be invisible enough to be admired. The laughter drifts down the hallway, a warm echo against the wallpaper's faded florals. You've wandered a bit from the parlor now, toward the back of the house, drawn not by curiosity, necessarily, but by the strange calm that seems to hang just behind the hum of conversation. You pause at the edge of a half-drawn curtain, and there they are. 2 of the maids, perched on small stools by the back stair, whispering in hushed tones and dabbing at their foreheads with handkerchiefs. One has already slipped off her shoes. The illusion, for a moment, has been set down like a heavy tray. You weren't supposed to see this, but now you're here. Behind the polished veneer of Victorian domesticity, there existed an entire invisible industry. Hiring servants by the hour wasn't as rare as you might think, especially in big cities like London, Manchester, and Edinburgh. The market for part-time help grew alongside the rise of the urban middle class. Families who couldn't afford a full-time household staff, but desperately needed to look like they could. Enter the daily servant. This wasn't like a modern temp agency. This was a murky network of acquaintances, seamstresses, dressmakers, laundresses, and cousins of cousins who knew someone willing to wear a starched cap and pretend to polish a mantelpiece for 2 shillings and a ham sandwich. Often, the agreement was spoken, not written. No references, no uniforms provided, just a bit of coin and a plea. Come around tomorrow and act like you live here. Historians still argue how formalized these arrangements were. Some say there were thriving underground servant economies, even crude ledgers kept in pencil behind pantry doors. Others claim it was all word of mouth, spread by whispered reputation at laundries, bathhouses, and women's boarding homes. Either way, there was a demand, and women met it. You duck back behind the curtain before the girls spot you. A moment later, one re-enters the dining room holding a tray of petit fours, her face reset to blank pleasantness. You wouldn't know she had just unpinned her hair in the shadows. There was a whole etiquette to these temporary arrangements. For one thing, the women had to arrive at the back of the house, always. Often at an odd hour, like 3:15 p.m., so the neighbors wouldn't notice. They'd be ushered in, given a brief overview. "You're Lucy today, you've worked here for 6 months, you always serve tea from the left." And off they'd go. In many ways, it resembled low-budget theater, and the stakes were higher than bad reviews. A guest who noticed a slip could unravel the entire illusion. Imagine one of the ladies asking a borrowed maid, "Weren't you the milliner's apprentice down on Fleet Street?" Or worse, catching the girl mispronouncing the name of a family dog. You'd be toast, cold, soggy, reputation-ruining toast. That's why some women paid extra for what were called reliable regulars, girls who had done this before, who knew where to stand, when to speak, how to fold napkins in that impossibly crisp triangle you only ever see in very ambitious households or royal weddings. Some even kept little notebooks, a kind of faux servant script, with reminders about the house they were working in. Mrs. Fairchild likes her tea lukewarm. Don't engage Mr. Fairchild in conversation. Tell guests the china came from Dover, not Deal. You re-enter the parlor, tea refreshed, posture corrected, and you notice a woman across the room giving you a knowing glance. She's older, sharp-eyed, possibly a real upper-class type, and she's been watching too. Watching the Maids. You catch a flicker of amusement on her lips. Not mockery, just recognition. Maybe she's hosted her own pretend help once or twice. Or maybe she's clocked the same things you have. That one girl just poured the milk before the tea, which no trained servant would ever do. The women hired for these roles weren't always young and sprightly. Some were older housekeepers between positions. Others were married women whose husbands had been injured or vanished or taken to drink. Sometimes they brought their children along, hidden in the kitchen or asleep in the coal bin. A few even brought skills with them, mending, ironing, cooking. And if they played their cards right, they could turn this casual gig into steady income, a sort of circuit of parlor appearances. One woman, nicknamed Parlor Polly in Chelsea circles, was rumored to have worked for over 50 households in a single year. No one ever knew where she actually lived. She simply appeared, starched and silent, then vanished again like a linen ghost. You sip your tea and try to picture what it would be like. Entering a stranger's home, pretending you belonged, knowing one wrong sentence could expose you, knowing someone might recognize you as the woman who fitted their corset last Tuesday or sold them gooseberries at the market, and yet still choosing to do it because you needed the money or the food or the simple dignity of appearing needed. The woman next to you comments softly, "These girls, they have such lovely manners, so rare these days." You nod, gently. So rare, indeed. Back in the drawing room, things are growing a little more animated. The tea has cooled, but the conversation is heating up. Someone is debating the merit of opera versus chamber quartets, though everyone seems to agree that either is best appreciated when one is seen attending, not necessarily understanding. Your hostess, Eleanor, is laughing with the calculated ease of someone who's practiced in front of a mirror. And across the room, a maid is dusting the base of a grandfather clock that's already gleaming. You're starting to notice just how much time these maids spend not doing actual work. She moves delicately, like she's waltzing with the furniture. One hand holds the cloth, the other rests behind her back. She doesn't so much clean as she graces the clock with her presence. Her hair is tucked neatly beneath her cap. Her apron still has that stiff, laundry-starched sharpness to it, so crisp it practically glows. And here's the secret that no etiquette book will admit outright. It's not what the maid does that matters. It's how she looks doing it. In this house, and dozens like it, the uniform is the performance. That cap, that apron, that demure downward gaze, all carefully chosen to whisper the illusion of wealth. A uniformed servant signaled not just order and cleanliness, it signaled class. It told guests that this house had means, discipline, hierarchy, that someone else handled the chores, that the lady of the house was above the dust. Even if the lady herself spent that morning scrubbing potatoes in her nightgown, historians still argue about the origin of the classic maid's uniform. Some believe it evolved from the outfits worn by actual servants in grand estates, functional but tailored for modesty and respectability. Others suggest it was a Victorian invention entirely, an aesthetic designed more for middle-class display than for practical labor. Either way, by the 1880s, the black dress with white collar and apron was the look. And so the women hired by the hour learned to wear it like armor. There were rules to it too. Aprons were to be bleached pure white. Caps had to sit just so, not too high, lest they look theatrical, not too low, lest they suggest slovenliness. Stockings must match, hair must be tightly coiled, and shoes mustn't squeak. If you looked too pretty, guests might talk. Too plain, and they might suspect. One woman, a certain Miss Lambert, who served in 6 different Kensington homes in 2 weeks, was dismissed from a job simply because her shoes were too fashionable. They undermined the illusion of servitude, someone sniffed. The goal wasn't invisibility, it was elegance without distraction. Some enterprising women began customizing their look. Lace trim on the apron, subtle embroidery on the cap, a borrowed brooch, worn only after the guests had a few glasses of sherry. The bolder ones would even perfect the art of walking noiselessly across wooden floors, what one employer dubbed the glide. Of course, all of this effort went into being seen, but never acknowledged. You watch as the maid now adjusts a vase ever so slightly. There is no dust on it. There was never dust. But the gesture matters. A guest across the room nods approvingly. The room feels more elegant, more complete, because someone is seen tending it. It's all theater. And just like any good production, timing is crucial. Some of the borrowed maids were instructed to enter and exit rooms in careful intervals, not so long that guests wondered where the help had gone, not so often that they drew attention. Eleanor had likely planned this. You'll walk through the drawing room twice an hour, she might have told the girl earlier. Straighten something, offer tea, say nothing else. Even the items carried were part of the choreography. A feather duster implied fastidiousness. A tray of glasses implied readiness. A stack of linens carried for no reason at all implied, well, abundance. That there were so many linens in the household that someone had to manage them, even if they were just being moved from one side of the room to the other. A touch absurd? Maybe, but also deeply effective. Guests judged each other harshly in this world. Noticing a loose button or a slouched posture could become tomorrow's gossip fodder. The right maid, seen at just the right moment, could boost your reputation. The wrong maid, say one with chipped nail polish or a Cockney accent too strong, could destroy it. And so, image became obsession. Even the illusion of cleaning became more important than the cleaning itself. One hostess famously instructed her hired maid to clean a teacup 3 times before dinner, each time in a different room, so guests might overhear and assume an entire team of servants was rotating duties. It worked. A guest commented later that the house ran like a ship under full sail. You glance over again. The girl with the feather duster is now repositioning the same vase. It's her 4th time. No one says anything. Everyone sees her, and everyone pretends not to, including you. And perhaps that's the strangest part of all, how willingly everyone agrees to this silent agreement. Guests don't ask questions. Hosts don't offer explanations. The maids don't break character. It's a performance with no script and no audience. And yet everyone laps in their own quiet way. Evening has softened into that hazy hour when the gas lamps outside start to glow like drowsy stars, and your teacup has long gone cold. The parlor grows a touch warmer, its air heavier with perfume and candle wax. Voices drop to a hum as people migrate toward the dining room, enticed by the faint aroma of something buttery and toasted. And just like that, the real performance begins. Dinner, in a Victorian household, is not just a meal, it's a social proving ground. Everything you've seen so far, the borrowed maids, the 2 white aprons, the impossibly shiny brasses, was just the overture. The dinner table is where the illusion must be airtight. Because nothing reveals the cracks in a household quite like a poorly timed entree or a guest reaching for their own bread roll. You're led to your seat by yet another uniformed girl, different from the ones before. She bows her head, places your napkin, and floats away in silence. You notice she doesn't quite meet your eyes. That could be nerves, or it could be because she usually works behind a bakery counter and only borrowed this uniform 2 hours ago. There are 10 guests tonight, just enough to seem intimate, but still require a full choreography of service. Historians still debate whether Victorian dinner parties were as emotionally exhausting as they sound, or more so. One scholar called them competitive elegance events, which is both accurate and sleep-depriving. Another argues that they offered women like Eleanor a rare form of control. In a world where she couldn't vote, work freely, or own property independently, she could dominate a seating chart like a battlefield general. Either way, tonight's operation has begun, and the troops are in place. The first course arrives, a consommé so clear you can see your reflection in it. The bowls are carried by a young man in a servant's coat, sleeves just a bit too long. You recognize him from earlier. He was trimming the roses out front. Is he also a gardener? No, probably not. More likely he's a nephew or a neighbor's apprentice who agreed to act butler for a slice of pie and a wink of coin. You've heard these stories. Boys in jackets 2 sizes too big, clutching trays like lifebuoys, their only instruction being, don't drop anything and don't talk. You almost feel nervous for him. But he performs admirably, balancing the bowls without a tremble. Across the table, another maid pours wine with all the grace of a ballerina. That's 3 different maids tonight, none of whom have been seen twice in the same room. That's by design. You see, one of the tricks in households like Eleanor's was rotational staffing. If your guests didn't see a maid more than once, they assumed there were many more staff at work. It was an illusion of abundance. You didn't just have one servant, you had a team, each assigned to a specific duty like your house was a grand estate, not a 3-story townhouse with a squeaky stair. The second course arrives, roast duck with some sort of prune sauce, probably purchased from a hotel kitchen, unless Eleanor has secretly taken up culinary sorcery. Still, the food is piping hot and plated with the kind of symmetry that suggests it didn't come from her oven. That's part of the deception, too. Many women in Eleanor's position learned to outsource elegance. Some borrowed footmen. Others borrowed actual dinners. There were even side businesses where you could order a full-course meal delivered to your back door, discreetly reheated by your day servant, and served as if it had been bubbling on your stove since sunrise. Guests didn't ask questions. In fact, asking questions was vulgar. You lift your fork and glance down the table. The silverware gleams, the candlesticks flicker, and everything appears so aimlessly curated that you almost forget the whole house was probably a frenzied rehearsal space this morning. One particularly well-dressed gentleman across from you murmurs to his companion, "I must say, Eleanor runs a very tight ship." The companion nods solemnly, adding, "Her staff are remarkably disciplined." Disciplined, or just nervous. The third course arrives. You're not sure what it is. Something fishy, something firm. The maid serving it avoids your eyes, though her hands are steady. You notice a tiny ink smudge near her collarbone. Ink from a pen. Not soot. Not kitchen grime. Perhaps she's a clerk by day, a school teacher's daughter? You're tempted to ask her name, but that would break the spell. And the spell must not be broken. There are stories of it unraveling. One dinner in 1887 ended in catastrophe when a hired maid recognized one of the guests, who'd previously bought a petticoat from her in a market stall. The 2 locked eyes mid-soup, and the poor girl dropped a tureen. The hostess fainted. Her reputation, unfortunately, never recovered. That's why Eleanor is careful. Her girls are quiet, nondescript, trained, even if only for a half hour in the scullery beforehand. Some hostesses even went as far as hosting rehearsals. They'd walk through every dish, every line of service, every doorway a maid must pass through, and when. 1 bell means serve, 2 bells means wait, 3 bells means stay in the hallway until you hear your name whispered. It sounds exhausting, and it is. But the reward? The sigh of admiration when a guest says, "Your household runs like a clock," or the discreet note from the vicar's wife asking for your soup recipe, even though you bought it from the Clarendon Hotel. And you have to admit, it's working. No one here is commenting on the oddities. No one is pointing out that 3 of the maids are eerily similar in height, or that the boy clearing plates has a scarlet ink stain on one cuff. Everyone is playing along, because everyone needs the illusion to hold. You finish your course and sip your wine. Someone makes a joke about the Queen's most recent fashion faux pas, something about ostrich feathers, and laughter breaks the tension. The evening drifts gently forward, and so do the servants, ever quiet, ever efficient, and possibly back in their real clothes before the pudding is even served. You're reclining ever so slightly in your dining chair now, the hem of your napkin resting in your lap, its folds carefully creased as if you might be judged for misplacing them. The courses have faded from view, but the performance? It's still very much on. Somewhere in the corner, a maid, yet another one, stands with her hands gently folded, waiting, watching, not for instructions, but for timing. And then she moves. She walks quietly toward the hallway, where you can just barely glimpse the base of a grand staircase. There, near the banister, she meets Eleanor, your hostess, still beaming from across the table, and they exchange a quick, whispered moment. The maid nods, then vanishes up the stairs with a candle in hand. And here's where it gets strange. A few minutes later, with dessert still warm in your mouth, your hostess excuses herself, and when she returns, she's no longer wearing her dinner jewelry. Her earrings are gone, replaced by a more relaxed post-dinner brooch and a simple lace fichu over her shoulders. Her hair looks ever so slightly fluffed. "Forgive me," she says with a soft laugh. "My maid insisted I change before entertaining in the music room, says I look more myself this way." Everyone chuckles politely. And you realize that entire interaction? The ascent up the stairs, the candle, the whispered moment, it wasn't for Eleanor's benefit. It was for yours. The maid who just went upstairs? She didn't fetch anything. She didn't run a bath or brush a hair. She made an appearance. A single, carefully staged performance to imply that Eleanor had a lady's maid tending to her wardrobe and evening look. She may not have even gone upstairs at all. She could have slipped behind a door, counted to 60, and returned to the hallway with her posture a little more formal. Because sometimes the job of a fake maid wasn't to clean or serve. It was to be seen, once, and vanish, leaving only the impression that something private and proper had just occurred. These phantom moments were social gold. Having a lady's maid was one of the most status-laden markers a Victorian woman could display. Unlike housemaids or kitchen staff, a lady's maid tended directly to her mistress. She brushed her hair, buttoned her gowns, adjusted her corsets. It was an intimate relationship, and an expensive one. To have one, even just for show, told the world you had crossed a threshold of elegance and means. So, some women got creative. They hired women to play the part just once in front of a visitor, walking behind their mistress, handing over a shawl, murmuring, "Madam's gloves are warmed," as requested. After that, the maid would leave through the garden gate and not return until the next social event. Sometimes it was the same girl used to serve tea. Other times it was a neighbor's cousin who happened to have fine hands and a steady walk. Historians still debate whether these single-performance ladies' maids were more aspirational or theatrical. One scholar wrote that they served as living metaphors for class aspiration, silently narrating the fiction of gentility in homes where gentility was rented by the hour. Another described them less romantically, as elegant props with borrowed petticoats. You sip your dessert wine and watch the room shift. You've seen 5 different maids tonight, maybe 6. One may have been a duplicate wearing a different cap. At this point, it's hard to tell. Eleanor catches your glance and offers a subtle, knowing smile. Not smug, just practiced. Like so, Mion who's pleased the trick has landed. Across the room, one of the maids walks by holding a silver hairbrush. She disappears toward a side room, murmuring something about preparing Madame's evening boudoir. No one follows her. No one asks why. But the message is clear. Eleanor is the kind of woman who has a boudoir that needs preparing. That hairbrush might not even be hers. Some women borrowed items, just like they borrowed help. You could rent a fur stole, a bracelet, even a monogrammed hand mirror. If it added to the atmosphere of refinement, it was worth the effort. The girl with the hairbrush doesn't return. That's the game. One appearance, one elegant gesture, and the illusion is sealed. And of course, it wasn't just about impressing others. For many women, it was about self-preservation. In a world where women's financial stability often depended on marriage, or the perception of having married well, projecting a refined lifestyle wasn't vanity, it was survival. Having a maid brush your hair in front of guests suggested that you were cared for, maintained, polished, that you were a woman of delicate needs, not rough hands, a woman worthy of admiration and perhaps protection. There's a story of a Mrs. Lillian Howlett of Brighton who once had her fake maid adjust her stockings in front of a visiting suitor. He later wrote in his diary, "Such grace in her bearing, even her maid treats her as one would a duchess." They were engaged 2 months later. Of course, the maid was a hat maker, and she was paid a bonus for knowing how to blush appropriately when he entered the room. The music room is now softly lit. Guests begin to migrate that way. A gentle waltz plays on the phonograph. You rise from your seat and glance back down the hallway, just in time to see one of the maids slipping into a coat by the kitchen door. Her cap's already off. Her hair falls in loose curls. In 5 minutes, she'll be someone else entirely. But for now, in this flickering candlelit house, she's part of the fantasy. A detail in a living still life. A ghost in polished shoes who leaves no trace but a comb set neatly on a cushion. The music room is hushed, the soft strains of a piano prelude drifting through the air like rose petals on water. You settle onto a divan near the edge of the room, where the lamplight is dimmest and the scent of beeswax and lavender lingers. Someone is playing a waltz, pleasantly, if a bit stiffly. Your hostess sits across the room, the image of effortless charm in a seafoam gown. And nearby, yet another maid appears, offering cordials on a silver tray that glints beneath the gaslight. This one is tall, with freckles dusted across her nose and a faint, fleeting smile. She carries herself with the relaxed elegance of someone who doesn't care to impress. And yet, somehow, that only makes her more convincing. You've stopped counting now, maybe 7, maybe 8. At this point, it hardly matters. The illusion is so well maintained that reality has started to feel like the thing being performed. And perhaps that's the most Victorian trick of all. Across the room, a woman you don't recognize murmurs to another guest, "I hear the Eltons have 4 maids now, 4, and a footman in livery." Your hostess tilts her head, her smile never faltering. "How very fortunate for them," she replies, the words wrapped in sugar and arsenic. Because here's the thing. Eleanor isn't just hosting a party tonight. She's competing. In a neighborhood like this, well-to-do but not quite aristocratic, appearances are a full-contact sport. Your furniture, your flowers, your flourishes, everything is up for critique. But nothing, not even a crystal chandelier, screams refinement quite like a full staff of servants. That's why so many women went to great lengths to keep up with their neighbors. If Mrs. Elton had 2 maids and a laundress, then Mrs. Chatwood would need 3 maids and a woman who looked exactly like a laundress. It didn't matter if the wash was actually done by hand in the scullery at midnight. What mattered was the suggestion that someone else had done it, and you hadn't lifted a finger. Historians still argue whether this competitive display of help was unique to British society, or whether similar trends flourished elsewhere. Among the bourgeoisie in Paris, the elite merchants in Boston, the wives of German barons who drank imported cocoa with borrowed porcelain and rented nannies. But few societies wore their class systems so stiffly on their lace-collared sleeves as the Victorians. In some London circles, it was said you could estimate a woman's respectability by how unaware she was of her own laundry. A lady who knew how her blouses were ironed? Suspicious. A lady who knew nothing of starch? Perfect. Which meant women like Eleanor had to outmaneuver not only poverty, but perception. Tonight, her performance is winning. You watch as two maids pass in the hallway, their steps perfectly timed to avoid awkward encounters. One dusts a bookshelf that has likely been cleaned 4 times today. The other moves a vase 2 inches to the left. Both disappear without a sound. And a moment later, Eleanor casually comments that her new girl has a knack for floral arrangements. A guest nods with mock envy. "Oh, I wish I could find good help," she sighs, pretending not to glance sideways at the hostess. This competition wasn't always friendly. Women sabotaged each other, quietly of course. A misplaced word here, a raised eyebrow there. There's a well-known story, known to the drawing room crowd, about a Mrs. Langdon who, accidentally, brought the same fake maid to a tea hosted by her rival. The girl was recognized instantly and asked to explain why. She was wearing the same earrings as the week before. The scandal echoed through Kensington for a season. There's even a rumor that some women paid their borrowed maids to pretend to be mistreated by a rival host, to whisper that Mrs. So-and-so made me iron linens for hours while she read penny romances in bed. Whether it's true is unclear, but as one Victorian gossip column once put it, truth and tea often steep in the same cup. You rise from the divan and make your way toward the corridor for a moment of fresh air, or at least cooler, less perfumed air. There you pass a small room where 2 maids, off duty or in between rounds, are adjusting their caps in the mirror. They're laughing, softly. One says, "Did you see her face when I said boudoir? She nearly swooned." The other giggles. "She asked me if I took sugar in my tea. I told her I didn't drink tea. That's for the ladies upstairs." They notice you too late. You pause, smile, nod politely, and continue on. The game goes both ways. The maid performance wasn't always about being silent and invisible. Sometimes it was about being just visible enough to nudge a rival's pride. A girl stationed in the perfect spot to overhear gossip. A tray passed at the precise moment someone mentions a recent scandal involving a neighbor's cousin and a misplaced corset hook. It was all choreographed. Eleanor knows this. Her expressions are carefully neutral as she re-enters the music room. A guest compliments her staff again. She simply shrugs. "I do my best," she says, as though she didn't spend the entire morning negotiating with a woman named Mags who sells ribbon and can convincingly play parlor maid on short notice. You take your seat again. The piano stops. Someone claps softly. A songbird sings outside. The evening is winding down, but the performance never does. The Eltons may have 4 maids and a footman, but tonight, Eleanor has outplayed them all, with borrowed grace, polished illusions, and a staff of women, who vanish like fog the moment no one's watching. And somehow, that feels more impressive than actual wealth. You find yourself in the hallway once more, the murmur of the music room soft behind you. The gaslight flickers gently above, casting long shadows along the floral runner that muffles your steps. Something compels you to head toward the kitchen, not out of hunger, but curiosity. By now, the truth has settled in your chest like warm brandy. These maids aren't really maids, and this household is a costume stitched together by candlelight. But who are they? You ease past a half-open door. Inside is a narrow, tidy kitchen, smaller than you expected, considering the grandeur out front. The scent of lavender polish still hangs in the air. and sitting at a small wooden table, rubbing her ankles and sipping weak tea, is one of the maids. She looks up, startled for a moment. But when she recognizes you, not Eleanor, not a guest who might tattle, she relaxes. "Evening," she says softly, her vowels round and warm. You nod. She gestures to the other stool, and before you quite realize it, you're sitting beside her, as if this were the most natural thing in the world. "My name's Winnie," she offers. "Real name, not the one I gave at the front door." She chuckles. "Tonight, I'm Emma, the second parlor maid." You ask if this is something she does often. "Oh, sure," she says, stretching her feet. "2 nights this week. Tomorrow I'm due at a place near Bayswater. Tuesday, I'm a scullery maid for a widow who wants to impress her niece's suitor. Only real scullery there is the one in her imagination." You can't help but smile. Winnie tells you she used to do seamstress work. Good at it, too. But the pay was worse than this, and her eyesight started to go. "This job," she says, "it's not hard, bit strange, bit silly, but it pays. And no one expects me to sew sleeves till my fingers bleed." She leans in conspiratorially. "Besides, you get a good meal if you're clever. That duck? Delicious." You ask if she finds it degrading. She laughs, not cruelly but with the tired amusement of someone who's been asked this before. "It's only acting," she says. "They act rich. I act useful. Everyone gets what they need." Historians still debate how these daily maids felt about their roles. Some scholars suggest it was humiliating, having to feign subservience to keep up someone else's social charade. Others argue it gave women like Winnie a surprising kind of agency. They could slip into homes, play their part, and leave without being bound by contracts or expectations. They were mobile, adaptable, and at times, invisible by choice. Winnie sips her tea and watches you for a long moment. "You know," she says, "some of these ladies think we don't notice what they say. But we do. All of it." She recounts a story about a hostess who once scolded her loudly in front of guests for folding a napkin wrong, only to slip her extra coin at the end of the night and whisper, "You were perfect." The humiliation was for show, the kindness, a secret. "She wanted to seem in charge," Winnie says with a shrug, "so I let her." There's a strength in that, a knowing strength. You ask if she's ever slipped up. "Oh, once," she grins. "Called a guest by the wrong name. She stared at me like I'd just set fire to her bonnet. Thought I was done for, but I just dipped a curtsy and said, 'Begging pardon, ma'am. I've such poor memory for names, what with so many fine visitors here.' She preened the rest of the night." Winnie, it turns out, is a master of her craft. The more you listen, the more you realize that these borrowed maids, these daily helps for hire, are not bumbling stand-ins or desperate beggars. They're professionals of a sort, improvisers, observers, mirrors held up to the household, reflecting only what the host desires to see. One girl Winnie knows is a former governess who outplays lady's maid on Sundays and writes pamphlets about etiquette in her spare time. Another is a widow with 4 children who brings her eldest to wait in the kitchen while she serves drinks and picks up gossip for possible matchmaking opportunities. Sometimes, Winnie says, you learn more in one night of serving than a lady learns in 10 years of calling cards. You hear a light knock at the kitchen door. Another maid peeks in, this one younger, with flushed cheeks and a worried look. "They're calling for the cordial tray," she says. "Do I walk left or right round the drawing room first?" "Left," Winnie says without hesitation. "Pass behind the men, not in front, and don't spill. If you do, blame the dog." "There's no dog." "There might be a dog," Winnie says firmly, and the younger girl nods and vanishes. You both laugh. That's when you hear the bells, faint but deliberate, a single chime from the hallway. It's the signal. Time for the final round of appearances. Winnie sighs, finishes her tea, and smooths her apron. "Well," she says, rising slowly, "time to be Emma again." You walk with her to the back hallway. As she pins her cap once more and straightens the collar of her borrowed uniform, her face shifts, softens, narrows, becomes appropriately blank. Not because she's forgotten who she is, but because she knows exactly who she's expected to be. She curtsies lightly, and in a practiced voice says, "Will that be all, madam?" Then she disappears down the corridor, footsteps quiet, posture perfect. And just like that, she's part of the illusion again. You return from the kitchen corridor feeling a bit like someone who's wandered backstage during a play and seen the actors passing around lemon drops and gossip. The illusion isn't shattered, but it's softened, humanized. Now, every lace cap and polished boot seems less like a uniform and more like a clever bit of costume. And then, just when you think you've gotten a handle on how far this illusion stretches, a new twist glides into the room. A maid enters with a silver coffee tray, bowing her head with precise elegance. She's tall, straight-backed, and silent. But it's not just her posture that catches your attention. It's the soft, deliberate accent that escapes as she murmurs, "Will madam take cream?" It's French, or something close enough to pass in dim lighting and upper-class company. "Ah," coos a guest near you. "French help, very continental." You glance at Eleanor. She's carefully looking not too proud of herself, which, of course, is the surest sign that she is. And just like that, the ante has been upped. Borrowed maids are one thing, but borrowed foreign maids? That's a whole different level of illusion. You sip your coffee, perfectly brewed, slightly nutty, and observe. The maid moves smoothly between guests, her vowels soft, her gaze distant, her R's faintly rolled. She doesn't say much. She doesn't need to. The mere hint of Frenchness does all the work for her. In Victorian England, French maids weren't just employees. They were symbols, markers of refinement, elegance, and continental savoir-faire. Never mind that many of them weren't French at all, just English girls with passable accents and good posture. Historians still debate whether the British obsession with foreign domestic staff was rooted in admiration or insecurity. Some say it reflected a cultural inferiority complex, a way for the British middle class to drape themselves in borrowed sophistication. Others argue it was pure affectation, a social game of one-upmanship. What's clear is this: hiring, or pretending to hire, a French maid was like installing a marble fountain in your sitting room. It didn't serve much purpose, but it certainly impressed the neighbors. Tonight, the effect is instant. "I simply must find one," murmurs a woman in a sapphire dress. "My cousin in Brighton swears by hers." You resist the urge to ask, what exactly this French maid does that a local girl couldn't, but you already know the answer. She's an accessory. You scan the room. The French maid, whose name may well be Betsy from Clapham, is now offering chocolates. She doesn't smile. That's part of the act. French maids, according to the Victorian imagination, were aloof, mysterious, and slightly too fashionable to bother with smiling. Some women even instructed their fake French maids not to speak unless directly addressed, just to avoid inconsistencies. One London hostess was known to say, "My Camille does not speak English, poor dear," whenever guests tried to engage her. Camille, in reality, was Margaret from Leeds, who spoke 3 languages and did side work as a letter scribe. There's even a recorded case of a woman in Bath who paid extra for a Polish woman to pose as Hungarian, simply because it sounded more exotic. The maid wore dark velvet, carried a lace handkerchief, and was instructed to look vaguely tragic while holding the tea tray. In some circles, accents became like wallpaper patterns. Trendy one month, gauche the next. You catch Eleanor's eye again. She gives a light shrug as if to say, "Yes, I hired a French maid, but it's really nothing at all. It's everything." These subtle one-up games were exhausting. If your rival installed new curtains, you hosted a luncheon with 5 courses. If your rival had a niece fluent in Latin, you displayed a borrowed peacock feather fan. And if your rival hired a real Irish maid, well, you implied yours was Parisian trained and wouldn't be caught dead using English lavender. The irony, of course, is that many actual working-class French or Irish girls didn't meet these expectations. They were human, flawed, tired, sometimes clumsy. But a fake French maid? She could be whatever the household needed her to be. She could be perfect. You hear a guest? Behind you murmur, she looks like the one from La Belle Assemblée. That's when it clicks. This performance isn't just about outclassing neighbors, it's about storytelling. The Victorian woman wasn't simply curating a household, she was curating a myth. The myth of being delicate, unburdened, tastefully exotic. A woman whose biggest concern was whether the peonies clashed with the portiere. And every maid, especially the foreign ones, was a character in that tale. You finish your coffee. The French maid collects your cup with a reverent nod. For a moment you almost believe it. The accent, the grace, the story. And then you notice a bit of chalk on her finger. Writing hand. She's probably a teacher by day, or a poet, or both. She leaves the room without a sound, and just like that, the story continues. You wander toward the back of the house once again, past the shadowed hallway, and into a narrow sitting room that seems mostly unused, too neat, too untouched, like it's there solely for appearances. You settle in quietly, half hidden behind a fern in a ceramic pot. And it's from this vantage point, in this forgotten corner of the house, that you witness something remarkable. A knock at the service door. 3 quick taps. Moments later, a woman appears, a middle-aged figure in a navy cloak, her face serious, clipboard in hand. She steps inside briskly, barely glancing around. Her expression is that of someone who is not impressed. She is met by Eleanor herself, who straightens as if she's greeting royalty. There's no fanfare, no greetings for guests. This isn't a social call. This is business. You, dear listener, have just glimpsed one of the unsung engines behind this entire farce, a domestic staffing agent. Not a grand dame of domestic perfection, no. She's more like a broker of carefully curated illusions, and the Victorians had quite a few of them. Agencies in cities like London, Liverpool, and Birmingham operated on a scale most people never imagined. Their job wasn't just to connect long-term servants with households. Oh no. These women, and yes, they were often women, catered to a very specific clientele, ladies like Eleanor, whose status depended on the appearance of help more than the help itself. These agents had rosters, contacts, lists tucked into worn leather books. They knew who could pass as a scullery maid for 2 hours, who had a posh enough accent to pretend to be a governess, and which girls owned their own aprons. Some even rented out props, teapots, polished trays, monogrammed hand towels, footstools, and silver hairbrushes that looked just convincing enough if kept at a distance. Historians still debate how formalized these services truly were. Some records suggest highly organized systems with rotating schedules, discrete ledgers, and strict rules. Others believe it was mostly word of mouth, trusted contacts operating under the radar to preserve the reputations of fragile social climbers. Tonight you get the sense that Eleanor's visitor is the more official variety. The woman with the clipboard and sharp eyes speaks in low tones. You can't hear every word, but you catch phrases like "return by 9," "same girl, different cap," and "next Sunday, no Polish accents this time." Eleanor nods, murmuring gratitude, then produces a small purse. There's the gentle clink of coins. No receipts are exchanged. And just like that, the woman disappears. You sit still for a moment, processing it all. This isn't a casual charade. This is an industry. There are rules, you suspect. Unwritten codes, payment schedules, emergency backups in case a girl falls ill or a guest recognizes someone from a previous event. There are probably whispered phone numbers tucked into sewing kits and housemaids who moonlight as valets when the price is right. The agency model, if you can call it that, is astonishingly modern. It's the Victorian equivalent of calling an Uber, except instead of a car, you've summoned an entire persona, complete with backstory and bun. And like with any thriving system, there are scams. One story tells of a fake agency that sent young men dressed as butlers to homes across Chelsea, until one accidentally served brandy from a flower vase and was exposed. Another tale speaks of a rogue maid who would perform beautifully for a night, only to pocket silver teaspoons and vanish into the fog. She was never caught, and her legend lives on in East End whispers. Eleanor, thankfully, seems to have avoided such disasters. That's not luck, that's reputation. The best agencies didn't advertise, they didn't need to. Their names were passed in hushed tones at sewing circles, behind fans at garden parties. A nod, a glance. Try Miss Bramhall, her girls know how to handle 3 forks without asking questions. You imagine the dossiers these agents must have kept, not just names, but notes. Sarah W. Good at hovering, poor posture when nervous, excels at tea service, never serve her custards. Eliza M. Knows Latin, sometimes forgets to mute accent, no eye contact with guests. Margaret F. Once played a duchess in amateur theater, overdoes it. Use with caution. There was probably a whole unspoken ranking system. Girls who earned the right to serve during high-profile dinners. Girls who graduated from hallway polishing to salon service. Maybe even internal rivalries. You can picture Winnie on that list. High marks for confidence. Good with guests. Slight tendency to laugh behind kitchen doors. You smile at the thought. This wasn't just labor, it was performance art. And the agents? They were casting directors, playwrights, and wardrobe mistresses rolled into one. You return to the parlor, where yet another maid has arrived, a new face, mid-30s, with a tired expression and perfect posture. She moves with the crisp detachment of someone who's done this 100 times and knows exactly when to disappear. You wonder, was she summoned just now? Did the agency send in a closer? Someone to carry the final trays and ensure the night ends smoothly? It's entirely possible. This isn't just a household. It's a stage. And someone backstage is pulling the strings with military precision and a 3-penny pencil. You've rejoined the guests now, the parlor glowing with the last of the candlelight and the faintest haze of cigar smoke trailing in from somewhere discreet. The mood has shifted, less performative, more relaxed. Guests sink deeper into chairs, and laughter, though still polite, is louder now. A few shoes have been quietly loosened beneath the hems of gowns. Even Eleanor has softened, her posture less formal, her tone warmer. But despite the cozy feel of the hour, the illusion still holds. You watch as a maid, yes, another one, replaces the flower arrangement on the table, not because the flowers have wilted, but because it's time. She walks slowly, so everyone sees her. She pauses, adjusts a single petal, and then moves on. And no one says a word, because saying anything would be to break the code. Tonight, you've come to realize there's a whole unspoken etiquette governing these performances, not just for the maids, but for everyone. This is not a world of grand admissions or acknowledgments. No one is supposed to say, "What a lovely maid," or "Where did you find such helpful staff?" Doing so would highlight the performance, and to highlight it would be rude. No, the correct approach is to quietly notice, to gently nod, to imply admiration by smiling at the hostess just as the maid leaves the room. A raised eyebrow, a faint murmur of tastefully mauve. And aged. These are the tools of praise in the house of social illusion. Historians still argue whether this unwritten etiquette helped maintain social cohesion or merely deepened the divides between classes. Some say it offered women a sophisticated game of control and subtle power. Others argue it trapped them in a never-ending spiral of performance, judging and being judged by impossible standards. Either way, the rules were there, and everyone followed them, even the maids. You've seen it now, several times, how they look past guests, not at them, how they move soundlessly, always just before or just after they're needed, never during, how they say, "Yes, madam," but never anything else unless prompted. These aren't accidents. They're part of the playbook. One wrong move, and the spell is broken. There are stories, of course there are, about hostesses who failed to train their borrowed help. A maid who stared too long at a guest, one who tried to curtsy with both knees, one who entered the drawing room and sat down on the settee while guests looked on in horror. These stories are passed from one calling card circle to the next, like cautionary tales whispered at a finishing school. But the rules weren't just about behavior. There were rules about speech. Maids were never to initiate conversation, never to speak of the weather, even if the ceiling was dripping rain, never to comment on guests, even by accident. One famously disastrous event involved a maid who complimented a guest's hairstyle. That guest took offense, muttering, "I didn't know the help had opinions." She was asked to leave, the guest, not the maid. Though the maid never worked that circuit again. You glance toward Eleanor, who's now standing near the fireplace, laughing softly with two older women. One of the maids passes behind her with a tray, offering digestives. Eleanor doesn't flinch, doesn't break stride, doesn't even acknowledge her presence, because she moat, stint. That would break the illusion that the maid is part of the household, not a hired convenience for the evening. There's a kind of elegant cruelty in it. You catch yourself wondering, do the maids ever slip? Ever speak out of turn? Ever mutter something under their breath and flee? Sometimes they do. One infamous account from a Mayfair luncheon tells of a maid who was criticized loudly by the host for wrinkled cuffs. She turned, smiled, and said, "Well, sir, I ironed them on the tram." Then she took a biscuit and left. Guests didn't know whether to applaud or panic. Still, most women like Eleanor couldn't afford those theatrics. They needed the evening to run smoothly. The illusion needed to hold. So they studied these unwritten codes, these delicate cues, these social sleights of hand. Some even taught them to their hired help in short whispered lessons the hour before guests arrived. There's even rumor of a tiny booklet passed between certain hostesses, a little manual with rules like, maids must never speak in complete sentences when guests are present. Never enter a room without something in your hand. Always exit toward the kitchen, even if you're going nowhere. If asked a question you don't know, say, "I believe Madam keeps that information in her diary." It's absurd. It's precise. It's the fabric of this entire house. You look around the parlor. You're surrounded by ghosts in starched linen. One offers you a final glass of sherry. Another adjusts a cushion that doesn't need adjusting. You catch the faintest echo of a whispered exchange between two maids near the hallway mirror. So quiet, it's barely real. And all of it, every quiet moment, is part of a shared performance. The guests know it's a fiction. The host knows it's a fiction. Even the maids, especially the maids, know. But to say so, to point at the illusion and call it out loud, that would be vulgar. So everyone plays along. Because there are rules. And in this world, following them isn't just good manners, it's survival. You're still in the parlor when it happens, a ripple in the curtain of pretense, so subtle, so swift, you almost miss it. It starts with a clink. Not loud, not dramatic, just a tiny, delicate sound. The kind that might go unnoticed if the room weren't steeped in the kind of hush that follows the fourth glass of port and the third retelling of someone's encounter with a minor duke at a flower show. But you notice. So does Eleanor. A guest, one of the younger ones, in pale green silk and the sort of fringe that suggests someone desperately trying to look older, sets down her glass and glances toward the sideboard. "Pardon me," she says with casual charm, "but did your maid just drop a ring into the sugar bowl?" You turn. The maid in question, a blonde girl with sharp cheekbones and perfectly folded cuffs, is frozen beside the tea tray. Her eyes are wide, too wide. Her mouth opens just slightly. There's a silence thick enough to butter. Eleanor, ever the tactician, steps forward. "Oh dear," she says lightly. She does tend to fidget with that old locket. Her grandmother's, I believe. It's always falling off. She smiles. Terribly sentimental, our Lucy. The maid, Lucy is it, nods. She doesn't say a word. just nods and retrieves the item from the sugar bowl with a grace that suggests she's done much stranger things in much stranger places. A few guests chuckle. The young woman in green shrugs, returns to her drink, and the moment is absorbed into the night, like wine into carpet. But not before you see it, the look that flickers between Eleanor and Lucy, a barely there twitch of the eyebrow, the smallest inclination of the head, a silent code. We recover. We move on. Historians still argue how fragile these illusions truly were. Some say the whole thing was a house of cards waiting to collapse. Others claim the opposite, that as long as everyone agreed to pretend, even a clumsy hand or a misplaced ring couldn't bring it down. Still, there were moments when everything did come crashing. One oft-told tale centers around a family in Marylebone who threw a garden party and hired 4 maids from different agencies. None of the girls had met each other before. 2 claimed to be named Rose. 1 had a limp she tried to disguise. And another, a hairdresser by trade, began loudly recommending scalp treatments to guests while offering lemonade. The entire event unraveled within an hour. Eleanor, thankfully, is better prepared. As the evening continues, Lucy is quietly rotated out, replaced by another girl with darker hair, slightly older, wearing the same apron and walking the same silent path. No one comments, no one questions. The house closes its eyes and resets. But the incident lingers. Later, as guests begin to gather their cloaks and carriages are summoned with faint shouts and whistles from the footpath, a few final whispers drift through the air. She's done well for herself, Eleanor. Very polished. I didn't even realize there were so many maids. The service was nearly invisible. It's better that way, another voice adds. Means you've trained them properly. Eleanor accepts each compliment with demure deflection, but you can see the edge of vigilance behind her smile. She knows how close it came. You make your way to the coat stand, where a maid helps retrieve your outerwear. Her hands are steady, her demeanor calm. And yet, something about her rings familiar. You squint. It's the same girl who greeted you at the start of the evening. Different cap, slightly altered hairstyle, but the same woman. And now she's the cloakroom attendant. You say nothing, because by this point you understand. The game isn't just about maintaining the illusion, it's about repairing it over and over with practiced ease. Every slip is countered by a graceful pivot, every mistake covered by elegance and timing. It's not about never being caught, it's about never letting the guest linger on what they saw. One woman famously said, "If you must stumble, stumble with a curtsy." You look back one last time before stepping outside. The parlor glows behind you, the last of the wine glasses clinking gently as chairs are pushed in and small farewells are offered. A maid dims the lights. Another adjusts a vase. You wonder how many of them are still here, how many left through the back door the moment the sugar bowl fiasco passed. This whole house, this whole evening has run on choreography. But tonight, it wobbled. And that wobble, the ring in the sugar bowl, the girl switching roles, the whispered save, it reminds you that even the most graceful illusion is still just that, an illusion. But you have to admire the finesse. Because in a world built on appearances, Eleanor didn't panic. She pivoted. And as you step out into the cool night air, you hear the faint click of the door behind you, sealing the house once more. Inside, the performance resets. The borrowed maids reassemble. And Eleanor, no doubt, is already thinking about how to do it all again next week, with tighter gloves and less jewelry. The fog curls around your ankles as you step further into the street, the cool damp settling into your collar. A coach clatters by, its wheels echoing on the cobbles. But you don't walk away just yet. Something pulls you back, not physically, but mentally. You glance over your shoulder at Eleanor's townhouse, where the last of the lights glow faintly behind drawn curtains. And you begin to wonder, what was all that really about? Was it just vain, nitty, social posturing, desperation in velvet gloves? Or was there something more? Historians still argue, Was this strange ritual of rented servants a sign of empowerment or further entrapment? Did these women, both hostesses and the maids they hired, play the game because it served them? Or because they had no other choice? You replay the evening in your mind, the seamless transitions, the accidental slip, the silent nods between guest and host, servant and stand-in. Everyone played their part. Everyone pretended. But why? Let's begin with the hostesses. For women like Eleanor, options were few and paths were narrow. The Victorian ideal of womanhood didn't leave room for ambition, at least not the kind that earned income, made policy, or reshaped cities. But social power? That was permitted. Expected, even. A well-managed home was a badge of pride, a reflection of her worth. And so, she leaned into the tools available. Borrowed servants weren't just a workaround, they were a survival mechanism. Eleanor couldn't conjure generational wealth out of thin air, but she could conjure the image of it. And in many cases, that image was enough to gain access to the salons, the matches, the invitations that kept a woman in the world. So was she a fraud? Or was she a quiet strategist? Then there were the maids, the Winnies and Lucys and dozens of others who slipped into these houses by the hour. Were they being used? Exploited? Or did they find, in this charade, a rare kind of control? Many of them did, in fact, make more money playing pretend in drawing rooms than they ever could in service. Full-time live-in positions were grueling, often isolating, and usually involved sleeping in freezing attics and rising at 4 a.m. to scrub boots with cold lye. But an evening as a maid for hire, 2 shillings, a warm slice of pudding, and the chance to leave by midnight with your dignity intact. No laundry, no scolding, no bruised hands. Just polish your boots, remember your alias, and curtsy at the right moments. Of course, it wasn't perfect. The risks were real. Exposure meant embarrassment, or worse, and there were always the guests who pushed too far, asked too many questions, or treated even fake servants with genuine cruelty. But still, the opportunity existed, and many women took it. Some even built quiet empires from it. There are mentions, tucked into letters and diaries, of women who managed entire networks of temporary maids, organizing appearances, swapping uniforms, and rotating shifts like silent stage managers. They rarely left records. Most couldn't read or write. But their work stitched together the illusion that held entire social ecosystems aloft. It was an economy of pretense, fueled by shared understanding and careful deceit. But does that make it shameful? You think back to that moment in the kitchen when Winnie looked you in the eye and said, "They act rich, I act useful. Everyone gets what they need." It wasn't said bitterly or resentfully. It was practical, measured, like someone who had spent a long time walking a narrow path and learned how to step lightly. And maybe that's what this all comes down to: navigation. Women navigating a world that offered them little autonomy, navigating appearances, expectations, the constant pressure to seem just enough, but not too much, to appear refined, capable, well-supported, yet never obvious about the effort it took. It's not hard to imagine why some might call it exhausting or brilliant, or both. You reach the end of the block and turn to look once more at the townhouse. The lights have dimmed, the curtains are drawn. Somewhere inside, Lucy is probably unpinning her hair and rubbing her ankles. Eleanor might be removing her corset and counting coins. The vase has been repositioned just so. The silver is tucked away. The script, for now, is finished. But tomorrow? Tomorrow, someone else will need to impress the Eltons. And the whole thing will begin again. Because while the Victorians claimed to value authenticity, what they truly loved was a well-executed performance. And behind every polished parlor, behind every carefully folded napkin, was a quiet partnership between the woman pretending to have help and the woman pretending to be it. The street is nearly empty now. you stroll back toward Eleanor's house, not to knock again, but to take one last pass. The lamps cast long shadows across the pavement, and a cat slinks past a hedge with the self-importance of a minor viscount. Above, the windows glow faintly. The guests have gone. The borrowed laughter has faded. And now, at last, the illusion can come down. Inside, the house is quiet, but not still. You imagine Eleanor standing at the hallway mirror, undoing her earrings with slow, practiced motions. Her face is tired in the lamplight. She has performed flawlessly tonight. Or close enough. The sugar bowl incident will haunt her for days, of course, but she recovered with grace. That's what matters. In the kitchen, the girls are peeling off uniforms, letting their shoulders drop, trading stories in low voices. Someone removes a starched apron and stretches with audible relief. A pair of stockings is rolled down, and a cap is tossed onto a chair. They become themselves again. Winnie is there, no doubt, joking softly with a girl who just fumbled her first dinner tray. Another pours water into a chipped mug. The mood is light, easier. No need to whisper, no need to curtsy. Their real names return, like long-lost sisters. And Eleanor? She thanks them quietly, not effusively. This is still a performance, after all, but enough to let them know they mattered. She offers payment in little folded bundles of coin. A biscuit in waxed paper. A borrowed hat returned. One of the girls, maybe Lucy, maybe Sarah, asks if she's needed next Thursday. Eleanor nods. Guests for supper, 6 o'clock sharp. Arrangements are made. Then the back door creaks open. One by one, the girls slip into the London mist, their steps light on the stone. No fanfare, no goodbye. Just the hush of feet and the faint scent of polish. And suddenly, the house is empty. The polished sideboard, the feather-dusted banister, the perfectly aligned cushions, all untouched now, still, as though the house has exhaled. You return quietly to the parlor, just in your imagination now. You sit once more in that velvet chair, the one where it all began. You stare at the place where the maid adjusted the vase for the third time. The silence settles around you like a blanket. Because here's what they never tell you. When the party ends and the guests are gone and the silver is wiped clean, the house feels lonelier than it did before. There's something ghost-like in a home full of borrowed people. For all the warmth and performance and praise, Eleanor is now alone in a space too big for her. Her hands, once perfectly idle for the benefit of guests, are now doing the quiet work. Blowing out the candles, lifting a tray, picking up a dropped fork someone forgot. The echo of footsteps no longer belongs to invisible maids. It's hers. You wonder if she minds. You wonder if she misses the pretense once it's gone. Or if the silence is a balm. If maybe, just maybe, this moment, her alone with her own breath, is the only real part of her day. She takes off her slippers. She walks barefoot on the rug. And she does not curtsy. You let yourself drift in that thought. The performance has ended. The illusion has faded. But it doesn't feel hollow. It feels human. Full of effort and grace and unspoken agreements. An entire cast of women moving through each other's lives like lanterns through fog. Brief, glowing, and then gone. The story isn't scandalous. It's not tragic. It's not even funny in the way the history books sometimes try. To make it, it's quiet. And maybe that's the whole point. That behind the stagecraft of Victorian society was a whole world of silent collaborations. Women lifting each other up, even while pretending not to exist. Helping each other maintain the fiction that gave them access, safety, or simply one peaceful evening where the world believed they had help, elegance, and control. Even if just for an hour. Even if the sugar bowl sparkled with secrets. Wind down, approx 300 words. Now as we leave Eleanor's house behind, Let your thoughts settle gently. The noise has faded. The gowns are hung up. The last candle has been pinched out. And there, in the quiet of her dim hallway, Eleanor takes a long breath, just as you might be doing now. Let your shoulders ease down, soft and slow. Imagine the hush of that grand home in the moonlight, the kind that feels like it belongs to a different world. The echo of shoes on stone. The sigh of a tired woman closing a door. The rustle of a uniform being folded for the last time tonight. It's all still. Not empty, not lonely. Just still. Even the illusion rests now. The performance, the guests, the borrowed laughter, they've all melted into memory. What remains is something softer, realer. A woman brushing out her hair in silence, another counting her coins by candlelight. The sense that, beneath all the pretense, everyone simply did their best. And you've been watching it all, safely tucked into your own quiet moment. So let your eyes get heavier. Let your breath deepen, like fog settling over cobblestones. Let go of the bustle, the chatter, the delicate balancing act of status and illusion. The story is finished. The stage is dark. Sleep well, friend.